From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Commercial airline travel is one of the safest ways to get around. The International Air Transport Association says there was less than one aircraft-related accident for every million flights in the air last year. So the odds are in your favor when you buy that plane ticket. And yet, fear of flying is one of the most common phobias people struggle with. Researchers estimate about 25 million adults in the U.S. suffer from aerophobia, or fear of flying. Randy Smith is a professor of psychology at Metropolitan State University of Denver. She studies why air travel provokes such an intense reaction in so many people. With the summer travel season about to get underway, she has some science-backed strategies to help you or a loved one overcome their fear of flying. And it starts with understanding what happens in your brain when that fear of flying kicks in.
So the first thing is that there are these external alarm bells that go off. Right there, we see a story about a midair collision, or we hear about air traffic controllers not being sufficiently staffed.
Right.
And so there are these external cues that we should be frightened. But then our brains exaggerate those cues. And so we have a lot of cognitive distortions, like overgeneralizing, like catastrophizing. And we're pretty good at doing those sorts of things. And in some ways, they help keep us safe. Being aware of threats is how we maintain our safety.
Sure.
But when we overgeneralize and catastrophize, we're just sort of spinning into something that far exceeds the real threat. And we avoid things that are anxiety-provoking. And all that does is accentuate our anxiety. Because air travel for many of us is pretty infrequent, the avoidance behavior just solidifies the anxiety.
Right.
So the people who travel less frequently are the people who are more anxious because they're not having to confront their anxiety.
They're just not getting as much chance to work through it. Could you talk a little bit about what the fear of flying feels like as someone gets ready to fly? What are the symptoms and when does it strike?
Well, some people can have full-blown panic attacks when they're there at the gate or approaching the airport even, and that can be really disabling and may prevent the person from even boarding the plane. Another thing that contributes, I think, to air travel anxiety, is that anxiety so often is an anticipatory event. We're, thinking about it before it happens. We have the ticket and we're not traveling yet for weeks maybe.
Right.
And so there's lots of time for us to build up anticipatory anxiety.
Sure. We've been hearing a lot of scary stories about flying in the news this year, from the tragic mid-air collision of a passenger plane and an Army helicopter in Washington, to a brief loss of communication between pilots and air traffic controllers at Denver International Airport in May. I am curious, Randy, how much the media triggers people's aerophobia?
Yeah, well, I hate to break this to you, Erin, since you're a journalist yourself, but I do think the media contributes a lot. Ever since that mid-air collision, it seems like rarely a day goes by without some kind of reporting of an air traffic mishap. So there's this kind of unfortunate interplay between people's anxiety and then what they're seeing and reading and hearing from media.
Well, I know I'm not alone in this feeling, but I myself get nervous when, the pilot comes on and says, folks, we're experiencing turbulence. I'm keeping the seatbelt tied on. When does this mild anxiety kind of cross the line into a fear that is debilitating?
When a person won't get on a plane, when a person is prevented from traveling to see loved ones or going on a vacation because the fear is so great that it's interfering with daily activities, with work or with travel for pleasure.
Well, the good news is we can work through a fear of flying. And as a psychologist, this is a specialty of yours. Let's talk about some specific strategies. And I want to start with that anticipation, that anxiety we get in the days leading up to actually going to the airport. What can we do to calm that nervous anticipation?
I think there are a couple of things under two big categories. One is confronting those cognitive distortions. So being aware that if I'm having a loop in my brain that's saying, oh, I'm never going to be able to get on the plane. If I do, I'm going to die. The plane it's not safe. Air travel isn't safe. And remembering that those are just things that our brain is telling itself and that we can recognize that as a distortion. And even just that recognition can help minimize its impact. We can replace those distortions with knowledge that air travel is safe. We can, sort of try to talk ourselves out of those fear-creating distortions like catastrophizing and overgeneralizing.
Right.
And then another thing we can do is distract ourselves. And that's a big umbrella because there are lots and lots of different things people do to create distraction.
And what do you recommend?
Like using maybe an app like Headspace or Calm, which are meditation apps and provide all sorts of calming and distracting audio signals that can help us ease our minds before we get on a plane, or a podcast that maybe has nothing to do with meditation or calming, but is just very interesting. Or, having the iPad and watching a movie, or walking, doing laps around the airport, or just keeping busy, again, distracting oneself.
Randy, you also encourage people to just fly.
Yeah.
What do you mean by this, and how does research show that this helps?
Well, with any phobia or fear, the longer we avoid it, the more entrenched the fear and anxiety becomes. And so if we can push through the fear and go to the party, even though we're having social anxiety, and, get on the airplane, even though we think we're going to die, what we do then is we teach ourselves that all of those thoughts we're having, those catastrophic thoughts, are not really going to happen. And then our fear diminishes. And we also teach ourselves that our own anxiety isn't dangerous. It's not going to kill us.
Yeah.
I am still alive. That wasn't pleasant, but I can do this. And so we just start having successes that reduce our overall fear.
Do you have a story about someone who overcame a fear of air travel by resolving to just fly?
I worked with a client who was very afraid of flying, had so much anticipatory anxiety, and had for years and years. And then she had a child and was at about year one of this baby's life, determined to take the child to another state to visit family, but was even more terrified of bringing the child on the plane. And we did a lot of preparation in advance. And what happened was, the sort of paradoxical thing is, traveling with the child actually reduced her anxiety because she was so focused on assuring her child's care and distraction. And so it took her out of her own head and into caring for her baby. And then she really had a much more pleasant experience than she had expected.
Randy Smith is a professor of psychology at Metropolitan State University of Denver. We'll include links to some of her helpful tips for coping with fear of flying in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.